Page 275, please, towards the bottom. By degrees, he came to spend less time in sleep, but he still felt no impulse to get off the bed. All he cared for was to lie quiet and feel the strength gathering in his body. He would finger himself here and there, trying to make sure that it was not an illusion, that his muscles were growing rounder and the skin tauter. Finally, it was established beyond a doubt that he was growing fatter. His thighs were now definitely thicker than his knees. After that, reluctantly at first, he began exercising himself regularly, top of 276. In a little while, he could walk 3 kilometers measured by pacing the cell, and his bowed shoulders were growing straighter. He attempted more elaborate exercises and was astonished and humiliated to find what things he could not do. He could not move out of a walk. He could not hold his stool out at arm's length. He could not stand on one leg without falling over. He squatted down on his heels and found that with agonizing pains in thigh and calf, he could just lift himself to a standing position. He lay flat on his belly and tried to lift his weight by his hands. It was hopeless. He couldn't raise himself a centimeter. But after a few more days, a few more meal times, even that feat was accomplished. A time came when he could do it 6 times running. He began to grow actually proud of his body and to cherish an intermittent belief that his face also was growing back to normal. Only when he chanced to put his hand on his bald scalp did he remember the seamed, ruined face that had looked back at him out of the mirror. I used to wonder as a kid when they would play anti-Nazi films for us in school, and they would show the images of the camps being liberated by the Allies, and I'd always think, like, why don't they just eat cheeseburgers? Because they need to get fat. And the teacher would try to tell me, like, when you're malnourished, your stomach shrinks, your chemistry changes. You can't just eat a cheeseburger and bingo, you're not starving anymore. You need IVs, for example. Stuff that you just don't invent in the middle of a death camp. His mind grew more active. He sat down on the plank bed, his back against the wall, and the slate on his knees, and set to work deliberately at the task of re-educating himself. He had capitulated. That was agreed. In reality, as he saw now, he had been ready to capitulate long before he had taken the decision. From the moment when he was inside the Ministry of Love, and yes, even during those minutes when he and Julia had stood helpless while the iron voice from the telescreen told them what to do, he had grasped the frivolity, the shallowness of his attempt to set himself up against the power of the party. He knew now that for 7 years the thought police had watched him like a beetle under a magnifying glass. There was no physical act, no spoken aloud that they had not noticed, no train of thought that they had not been able to infer. Even the speck of whitish dust on the cover of his diary they had carefully replaced. Ooh, remember that? Kind of forgotten about that one. They had played soundtracks to him, shown him photographs. Some of them were photographs of Julia and himself. Yes, even he could not fight against the party any longer. Besides, the party was in the right. It must be so. How could the immortal collective brain be mistaken? But what external standard could you check its judgments? Sanity was statistical. It was merely a question of learning to think, as they thought, only... The pencil felt thick and awkward in his fingers. He began to write down the thoughts that came into his head. He wrote the first large, clumsy capitals. Freedom is slavery. Then, almost without a pause, he wrote beneath it, 2 and 2 make 5. But then there came a sort of check. His mind, as though shying away from something, seemed unable to concentrate. He knew that he knew what came next, but for the moment, he could not recall it. When he did recall it, it was only by consciously reasoning out what it must be. It did not come of its own accord. He wrote, God is power. He accepted everything. The past was alterable. The past never had been altered. Oceania was at war with East Asia. Oceania had always been at war with East Asia. Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford were guilty of the crimes they were charged with. He had never seen the photograph that disproved their guilt. It had never existed. He had invented it. He remembered remembering contrary things, but those were false memories, products of self-deception. How easy it all, top of 278, was. Only surrender, and everything else followed. It was like swimming against a current that swept you backwards, however hard you struggled, and then suddenly deciding to turn around and go with the current instead of opposing it. Nothing had changed except your own attitude. The predestined thing happened in any case. He hardly knew why he had ever rebelled. Everything was easy, except... I was thinking of Lincoln. We were talking yesterday that there are some current change histories going on right now, like the January 6th coup was just a peaceful protest, the cop killing coup. Anything could be true. The so-called laws of nature were nonsense. The law of gravity was nonsense. If I wished, O'Brien had said, I could float off this floor like a soap bubble. Winston worked it out. If he thinks he floats off the floor, and if I simultaneously think I see him do it, then the thing happens. Suddenly, like a lump of submerged wreckage breaking the surface of water, the thought burst into his mind. It doesn't really happen. We imagine it. It's a hallucination. He pushed the thought under instantly. The fallacy was obvious. It presupposed that somewhere or other, outside oneself, there was a real world where real things happen. But how could there be such a world? What knowledge have we of anything, save through our own minds? All happenings are in the mind. Whatever happens in all minds truly happens. Yeah, guys, they weren't cop killers.
Yeah.
He had no difficulty in disposing of the fallacy, and he was in no danger of succumbing to it. He realized, nevertheless, that it ought never to have occurred to him. The mind should develop a blind spot whenever a dangerous thought presented itself. The process should be automatic, instinctive. Crime stop, they called it in Newspeak. He set to work to exercise himself in crime stop. He presented himself with propositions. The party says the earth is flat. The party says that ice is heavier than water, and trained himself in not seeing or not understanding the arguments that contradicted them. It was not easy. It needed great powers of reasoning and improvisation. The arithmetical problems raised, for instance, by such a statement as 2 and 2 make 5, top 279, were beyond his intellectual grasp. It needed also a sort of athleticism of mind, an ability at one moment to make the most delicate use of logic, and at the next to be unconscious of the crudest logical errors. Stupidity was as necessary as intelligence, and as difficult to attain. That might be my next tattoo right there. Because notice how some people will say ridiculous lies, and they'll look you dead in the eye like, you don't believe it? You're the stupid one. Haitian immigrants eat cats with a straight face. Like, how do you even say that with a straight face? And no one, and still, I bet there's people that go, yeah, Haitian immigrants, I hate them. All because of that one lie. And then my mind goes to the struggle that those Haitian people had to have gone through. I know Haiti is basically a lawless country. I know Haiti was ravaged by colonization, and is still living with the effects of it. Corruption in their governments, their gang warfare, it's horrible. And for those people to have made it here, made it into our refugee program, made it to Ohio, made it into the business community, are now on their way to citizenship, and just like they're the quintessential America.
Yep.
But some people choose to hate them instead. I don't understand it. I don't know if I ever will. 279, first indentation. All the while, with one part of his mind, he wondered how soon they would shoot him. Everything depends on yourself, O'Brien had said. but he knew that there were no conscious act by which he could bring it nearer. It might be 10 minutes hence or 10 years. They might keep him for years in solitary confinement. They might send him to a labor camp. They might release him for a while, as they sometimes did. It was perfectly possible that before he was shot, the whole drama of his arrest and interrogation would be enacted all over again. The one certain thing was that death never came at an expected moment. The tradition, the unspoken tradition, somehow you knew it, though you never heard it said, was that they shot you from behind, always in the back of the head, without warning, as you walked down a corridor from cell to cell. One day, but one day was not the right expression, just as probably it was in the middle of the night. Once he fell into a strange, blissful reverie. He was walking down the corridor, waiting for the bullet. He knew that it was coming in another moment. Everything was settled, smoothed out, reconciled. There were no more doubts, and no more arguments, no more pain, no more fear. His body was healthy and strong. He walked easily with the joy of movement and with a feeling of walking in sunlight. He was not any longer in the narrow white corridors of the Ministry of Love. He was in the enormous sunlit passage, a kilometer wide, down which he had seemed to walk in the delirium induced by drugs. He was in the golden country, following the foot track across the old rabbit-cropped pasture. He could feel the short, springy turf top of 280 under his feet, and the gentle sunshine on his face at the edge of the field where the elm trees faintly stirring, and somewhere beyond that was the stream where the dace lay in the green pools under the willows. I think it's a type of little fish. Suddenly he started up with a shock of horror. The sweat broke out on his backbone. He had heard himself cry aloud, "Julia, Julia, my love, Julia." For a moment he had had an overwhelming hallucination of her presence. She had seemed to be not merely with him, but inside him. It was as though she had got into the texture of his skin. In that moment he had loved her far more than he had ever done when they were together and free. Also, he knew that somewhere or the other she was still alive and needed his help.
Hearing he hated himself and she was inside him in the same chapter is a very interesting experience for a Sigma classic. Yeah, whatever you say, George Orwell. If you wanted to write porn, you could have just done that. Yeah. It's okay.
And
I apologize. I didn't.
Weren't there rumors that Orwell was closeted? So
yeah.
So is it okay then, in the culture of being closeted, that you write sexy stuff about heteros, and that's like okay, and like you're expressing what you...
I think it's okay. I just think the nature of the book makes it feel very different.
Yeah, it's not... Even the romantic parts were kind of,
dystopian.
His ulcer was bleeding, and they were in the bed bugs crawled over them, and they kissed. Like, it's like gross. Like, yeah.
What an ideal situation.
Just the you're so oppressed that you don't care about bed bugs because you have just a little taste of freedom. I don't know. That's pretty. Okay, middle 280. She needed his help. He lay back on the bed and tried to compose himself. What had he done? How many years had he added to his servitude by that moment of weakness? In another moment, he could hear the tramp of boots outside. They could not let such an outburst go unpunished. They would know now, if they had not known before, that he was breaking the agreement he had made with them. He obeyed the party, but he still hated the party. In the old days, he had hidden a heretical mind beneath an appearance of conformity. Now he had retreated a step further. In the mind, he had surrendered, but he had hoped to keep the inner heart inviolate. He knew that he was in the wrong, and he preferred to be in the wrong. They would understand that. O'Brien would understand it. It was all confessed in that single foolish cry. He would have to start all over again. It might take years. He ran a hand over his face, trying to familiarize himself with the new shape. There were deep furrows in the cheeks, and the cheekbones felt sharp, the nose flattened. Besides, since last seeing himself in the glass, he had been given a complete new set of teeth. It was not easy to preserve inscrutability when you did not know what your face looked like, top 281. In any case, mere control of the features was not enough. For the first time, he perceived that if you want to keep a secret, you must also hide it from yourself. You must know all the while that it is there, but until it's needed, you must never let it emerge into your consciousness in any shape that could be given a name. From now onwards, he must not only think right, he must feel right, dream right, and all the while he must keep his hatred locked up inside himself like a ball of matter which was part of himself and yet unconnected with the rest of him, a kind of cyst. One day they would decide to shoot him. You could not tell when it would happen, but a few seconds beforehand it should be possible to guess. It was always from behind, walking down a corridor. 10 seconds would be enough. In that time, the world inside him could turn over, and then suddenly, without a word uttered, without a check in his step, without the changing of the line in his face, suddenly the camouflage would be down, and bang would go the batteries of his hatred. Hatred would fill him like an enormous roaring flame, and almost in the same instant, bang, would go the bullet, too late or too early. They would have blown his brain to pieces before they could reclaim it. The heretical against orthodoxy. I don't like communion, Catholics. The heretical thought would be unpunished, unrepented, out of the reach forever. They would have blown a hole in their own perfection to die hating them. That was freedom. He shut his eyes. Bless you. It was more difficult than accepting an intellectual discipline. It was a question of degrading himself, mutilating himself. He had got to plunge into the filthiest of filth. What was the most horrible, sickening thing of all? He thought of Big Brother, the enormous face. Because of constantly seeing it on posters, he always thought of it as being a meter wide, with its heavy black mustache. Big Brother was in the Oval Office yesterday. The enormous face, because constantly seeing the poster, with its heavy black mustache and the eyes that followed you to and fro, seemed to float into his mind of its own accord. What were his true feelings toward Big Brother? Top of 82. There was a heavy tramp of boots in the passage. The steel door swung open with a clang. O'Brien walked into the cell. Behind him were the waxen-faced officer and the black uniformed guards. "Get up. Come here." Winston stood opposite him. O'Brien took Winston's shoulders between his strong hands and looked at him closely. "You have had thoughts of deceiving me. That was stupid. Stand up straighter. Look me in the face." He paused and went on in a gentler tone. "You are improving. Intellectually, there is very little wrong with you. It is only emotionally that you have failed to make progress. Tell me, Winston, and remember, no lies. You know that I am always able to detect a lie. Tell me, what are your true feelings toward Big Brother?" "I hate him." "You hate him. Good. Then the time has come for you to take the last step. You must love Big Brother. It is not enough to obey him. You must love him." He released Winston with a little push toward the guards. "Room 101. At each stage of his imprisonment, he had known, or seemed to know, whereabouts he was in the windowless building. Possibly there were slight differences in the air pressure. The cells where the guards had beaten him were below ground level. The room where he had been interrogated by O'Brien was high up near the roof. This place was many meters below underground, as deep down as it was possible to go. It was bigger than most of the cells he had been in, but he had hardly noticed his surroundings. All he noticed was there were two small tables straight in front of him, each covered with green baize. 283. One was only a meter or two from him. The other was further away, near the door. He was strapped upright in a chair, so tightly that he could move nothing, not even his head. A sort of pad gripped his head from behind, forcing him to look straight in front of him. For a moment he was alone. Then the door opened and O'Brien came in. "You asked me once what was in room 101. I told you that you knew the answer already. Everyone knows it. The thing that is in room 101 is the worst thing in the world." The door opened again. A guard came in, carrying something made of wire, a box or basket of some kind. He set it down on the further table. Because of the position in which O'Brien was standing, Winston could not see what the thing was. The worst thing in the world varies from individual to individual. It may be burial alive, or death by fire, or by drowning, or by impalement, or 50 other deaths. There are cases where it is some quite trivial thing, not even fatal. He had moved a little to one side so that Winston had a better view of the thing on the table. It was an oblong wire cage with a handle on top for carrying it by. Fixed in the front of it was something that looked like a fencing mask with the concave side outwards. Concave, like the curve of a skateboard from like the heel to your toe is concave. And I didn't put my finger anywhere. Gosh, I'm sorry. Heretical. Okay, sorry. Oh, it looked like a fencing mask, concave side outwards. Although it was 3 or 4 meters away from him, he could see that the cage was divided lengthways into 2 compartments, and that there was some kind of creature in each. They were rats. In your case, the worst thing in the world happens to be rats. Are you already imagining what I'm imagining? A sort of premonitory tremor, a fear of he was not certain what, had passed through Winston as soon as he caught his first glimpse of the cage. But at this moment, the meaning of 284, the mask light attachment in front of it, suddenly sank into him. His bowels seemed to turn to water. You can't do that, he cried out in a high, cracked voice. You couldn't, it's impossible. Do you remember the moment of panic that used to occur in your dreams? There was a wall of blackness in front of you and a roaring sound in your ears. There was something terrible on the other side of the wall. You know that you knew what it was, but you dared not drag it into the open. It was the rats that were on the other side of the wall. Oh, Brian, said Winston, making an effort to control his voice. You know this is not necessary. What is it that you want me to do? O'Brien made no direct answer. When he spoke, it was in the schoolmasterish manner that he sometimes affected. He looked thoughtfully into the distance, as though he were addressing an audience somewhere behind Winston's back. By itself, I hate to do this, but look at the time.